in the shadows of history lies one of aviation's most remarkable transformation stories. A tale of devastating failure that became Britain's deadliest secret weapon. The Westland Lysander began as one of the Royal Air Force's most promising aircraft, yet within months, it would earn the grim distinction of suffering catastrophic losses that would have ended most military careers. However, this ungainly machine would rise from the ashes of defeat to become the most feared and effective clandestine aircraft of World War II, earning a reputation that would terrify German forces across occupied Europe. Picture this. In the darkness of a moonlit French field, a strange aircraft touches down silently, its massive wheels absorbing the shock of landing on rough terrain where no conventional aircraft could dare to operate. Within seconds, shadowy figures emerge, disappearing into the night to begin missions that would change the course of the war. This was the secret life of the Westland Lysander, Britain's most unlikely war hero. The story begins in 1934, when the British Air Ministry issued Specification A39/34, calling for a revolutionary new Army cooperation aircraft to replace the aging Hawker Hector. The requirement seemed straightforward enough. Design an aircraft capable of artillery spotting, reconnaissance, and light bombing missions. However, what emerged from Westland Aircraft's design team would challenge every conventional notion of what a military aircraft should look like. Arthur Davenport, working under the brilliant direction of William Edward "Teddy" Petter, approached this challenge with unprecedented thoroughness. Petter, for whom this represented only his second aircraft design, spent countless hours interviewing Royal Air Force pilots to understand exactly what they needed from such an aircraft. The pilots' responses would shape one of aviation's most distinctive designs. They demanded exceptional visibility for spotting enemy positions, stable low-speed handling characteristics for precision artillery observation, and most critically, the ability to operate from the smallest, most improvised airstrips imaginable. The result was the Westland P-8, an aircraft so unusual in appearance that it seemed to defy the laws of aerodynamics. The Lysander featured high-mounted wings with a distinctive reverse taper toward the root, creating an almost gull-wing appearance from certain angles, though the spars remained straight. The massive streamlined wheel spats weren't merely aesthetic choices, but served multiple functions, housing Browning machine guns and providing mounting points for removable stub wings that could carry light bombs or supply canisters. On June 15, 1936, the prototype Lysander took to the skies for its maiden flight. The aircraft was powered by an 840-horsepower Bristol Mercury 9 radial engine, and despite its unconventional appearance, it demonstrated remarkable capabilities. The production version that would emerge, the Lysander Mark I, would be equipped with the more powerful 890-horsepower Bristol Mercury 12 engine, giving it a maximum speed of 219 miles per hour. Yet it was the aircraft's most extraordinary capability that would define its legacy. The Lysander could perform incredibly short takeoffs and landings, requiring as little as 200 meters of runway space, where other aircraft needed vastly longer strips. This short takeoff and landing performance, though the term STOL wouldn't be coined until later, was achieved through the aircraft's broad-wing design and massive control surfaces. The aircraft could comfortably operate from pastures, fields, and even forest clearings, landing in spaces that seemed impossible for any conventional aircraft. The first Lysanders entered Royal Air Force service in June 1938, initially equipping squadrons for Army cooperation duties. The aircraft appeared to fulfill its design requirements admirably, with crews praising its exceptional visibility and stable handling characteristics. The high-mounted cockpit provided pilots with an unobstructed view in all directions, while the aircraft's docile flying characteristics made it ideal for the precise work required in artillery spotting missions. However, the aircraft carried armament that hinted at its intended versatility. Two forward-firing .303 caliber Browning machine guns were mounted in the wheel fairings, while the observer in the rear cockpit could operate two additional Lewis guns. The aircraft could also carry four 20-pound bombs on a light series carrier beneath the fuselage, or up to 500 pounds of ordnance on the undercarriage stub-wing hardpoints. When Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, the Lysander seemed ready to prove itself in combat. Four regular squadrons equipped with Lysanders accompanied the British Expeditionary Force to France in October 1939, with a fifth squadron joining them early in 1940. The aircraft initially performed reconnaissance missions and artillery spotting duties, tasks for which they had been specifically designed. But the harsh reality of modern warfare was about to deliver a devastating blow to the Lysander's reputation when Germany launched its Blitzkrieg offensive against France and the Low Countries on May 10, 1940. Lysanders were thrust into a combat environment for which they were tragically unprepared. The aircraft that had seemed so capable in peacetime exercises was about to face the lethal efficiency of the Luftwaffe. The massacre began almost immediately. Despite occasional victories against German aircraft, Lysanders proved to be sitting targets for enemy fighters, even when escorted by Hurricanes. The aircraft's maximum speed of 212 miles per hour made it impossibly slow compared to German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109, which could achieve speeds exceeding 350 miles per hour. The Lysander's large size and distinctive silhouette made it easy to spot from great distances, while its lack of armor protection meant that even light enemy fire could prove fatal. The statistics tell a horrifying story of systematic destruction. During the catastrophic months of May and June 1940, 118 Lysanders were shot down over France and Belgium out of a total of 175 deployed. This represented a loss rate of over 67%, one of the highest casualty rates suffered by any aircraft type during World War II. In some units, the losses were even more devastating, with entire squadrons being effectively wiped out within weeks. The aircraft proved too fast for effective artillery spotting, as pilots found it difficult to maintain the slow, steady flight patterns necessary for accurate observation while remaining vulnerable to enemy fire. Simultaneously, it was far too slow and unmaneuverable to survive encounters with enemy fighters. The Lysander was also too large to conceal quickly after landing and too heavy to operate safely on the soft ground that characterized many forward airstrips. By the time of the Dunkirk evacuation, it had become painfully clear that the Lysander was utterly unsuitable for frontline combat operations. The aircraft that had been hailed as a revolutionary advance in Army cooperation had become a death trap for its crews. Withdrawn from France during the evacuation, the surviving Lysanders continued to fly supply-dropping missions to Allied forces from bases in England, but their days as a frontline combat aircraft appeared to be over. The Royal Air Force brass faced a difficult decision. They had invested heavily in the Lysander program, with a total of 1,786 aircraft eventually being produced. The aircraft represented a significant financial investment and considerable manufacturing resources. More importantly, despite their combat failures, the Lysanders possessed unique capabilities that no other aircraft in the RAF inventory could match. Throughout the remainder of 1940, Lysanders were assigned to coastal patrol duties, flying dawn and dusk reconnaissance missions along Britain's coastline. In the event of a German invasion, they were tasked with attacking landing beaches with light bombs and machine guns, though few believed they would survive long in such a role. Some UK-based Lysanders were reassigned to air-sea rescue duties, dropping life rafts to downed RAF aircrew in the English Channel. 14 squadrons and flights were eventually formed for this humanitarian role in 1940 and 1941. However, even as conventional military leaders wrote off the Lysander as a costly failure, a small group of men in the shadows of Whitehall were beginning to see revolutionary potential in the aircraft's unique capabilities. The Special Operations Executive, Britain's newest and most secretive military organization, was tasked with coordinating resistance movements across Nazi-occupied Europe. They needed an aircraft capable of operating in conditions that would challenge every conventional notion of military aviation. The transformation began in August 1941, when a new squadron, No. 138 Special Duties, was formed to undertake missions for the Special Operations Executive. The squadron's mission was unlike anything previously attempted in military aviation: maintain clandestine contact with resistance movements across occupied Europe, insert and extract secret agents behind enemy lines, and deliver supplies to underground networks operating in the heart of Nazi territory. For these missions, conventional aircraft were useless. Heavy bombers could drop supplies, but couldn't retrieve personnel. Fighters lacked the range and payload capacity for extended operations. Transport aircraft required established airfields with prepared runways, facilities that simply didn't exist in occupied territory. The Special Operations Executive needed an aircraft that could land in a farmer's field, unload passengers and cargo, and disappear into the night without leaving a trace. The Lysander's unique short-field performance made it the perfect candidate for this role. An aircraft that could land in 200 meters, could operate from virtually any flat piece of ground, regardless of surface conditions. The high wing configuration provided excellent ground clearance, while the robust fixed landing gear could absorb the punishment of repeated landings on unprepared surfaces. Extensive modifications were required to transform the combat failure into Britain's premier secret agent aircraft. The Lysander Mark III variants selected for special duties underwent comprehensive rebuilding. The rear-facing machine guns were removed to save weight and eliminate anything that might complicate the aircraft's new mission. In their place, engineers installed a rearward-facing bench seat capable of accommodating 2 passengers, with a third seat positioned on a shelf at the rear of the compartment. A fixed ladder was permanently installed on the port side of the fuselage, allowing passengers to board and exit quickly without external assistance. This seemingly minor modification was crucial for operations where every second on the ground increased the risk of detection. The aircraft's small bomb racks were removed, and the radio equipment was upgraded to include the latest navigation and communication systems available. Most significantly, a large 150-gallon drop tank was installed beneath the fuselage, dramatically extending the aircraft's operational range to over 1,150 miles. This additional fuel capacity meant that Lysanders could penetrate deep into occupied territory, complete their missions, and return to base without the need for intermediate refueling stops. The aircraft's appearance was also transformed for its new role. Initially, Special Duties Lysanders were painted in a distinctive matte black finish that earned them the nickname moonplanes. This dark color scheme was intended to make the aircraft nearly invisible during nighttime operations, though later aircraft received more conventional camouflage patterns as operational experience refined the requirements. The first Special Operations Executive missions began in August 1941, marking the beginning of one of World War II's most daring and secretive air operations. A second squadron, No. 161 Special Duties, was soon formed to expand the program's capabilities. These units operated from highly classified airfields, initially at Newmarket in Suffolk, and later at the purpose-built facility at Tempsford in Bedfordshire. The missions themselves were exercises in precision flying and split-second timing that would challenge the skills of even the most experienced pilots. Operations were carefully planned around the lunar calendar, with missions typically taking place within a week of the full moon. Moonlight was essential for navigation, as pilots flew with no electronic navigation equipment beyond basic radio and compass systems. The silvery illumination provided by a full moon allowed skilled pilots to navigate by landmark recognition, following rivers, roads, and distinctive terrain features to their destinations. Lysander crews would depart from their secret bases in the late evening hours, flying at low altitude to avoid German radar detection. The aircraft's modest performance, once considered a fatal weakness, now became a crucial advantage. Flying at altitudes between 500 and 1,000 feet, Lysanders could slip beneath the coverage of most German radar systems, which were optimized to detect high-altitude bomber formations. The pilots who flew these missions were among the most skilled and courageous in the Royal Air Force. They navigated by dead reckoning across hundreds of miles of hostile territory, often in marginal weather conditions, to reach precisely defined landing zones that might be nothing more than a small field marked by a handful of flashlights. The psychological pressure was enormous, as any mechanical failure or navigational error could result in capture, interrogation, and execution. Landing zones were typically selected by resistance networks and communicated to London through coded radio transmissions. The fields had to meet specific criteria. They needed to be at least 400 meters long and relatively flat, with approaches clear of obstacles like power lines or tall trees. Most importantly, they had to be in areas where German patrols were unlikely to investigate unusual nighttime activity. The landing procedure itself was a masterclass in precision flying. Approaching the field at minimum safe altitude, pilots would watch for the arranged light signals from resistance fighters on the ground. Typically, 4 or 5 flashlights would mark the corners and center line of the improvised runway. The pilot had to judge distance, wind direction, and approach angle in near total darkness, often with no second chance if the landing attempt failed. Once on the ground, operations proceeded with military efficiency. Passengers would exit via the fixed ladder, while resistance fighters unloaded supply containers and equipment. New passengers would board quickly, often carrying intelligence documents or critical information that needed to reach London immediately. The entire ground operation was designed to take no more than 3 to 5 minutes, minimizing the risk of detection by German patrols or aircraft. The return flight posed its own unique challenges. Now carrying different passengers and potentially valuable intelligence, pilots had to navigate back across occupied territory, while German night fighter crews became increasingly active. The aircraft's modest speed and altitude capabilities, which had proven so disastrous in daylight combat, became advantages during these nighttime infiltration missions. Despite the extreme risks involved in these operations, the statistical record of Special Operations Executive Lysander missions was remarkably successful. Throughout the entire course of these clandestine operations, only 1 Lysander was shot down over France, and only 1 was captured by German forces. This represented a loss rate of less than 1%, a dramatic contrast to the aircraft's disastrous combat record during the Battle of France. The human cost of these missions, while significantly lower than conventional combat operations, was still substantial. Each mission carried the risk of mechanical failure, bad weather, or simply being in the wrong place when a German patrol arrived. The crews who flew these missions knew that capture would likely mean interrogation, torture, and execution, as they were operating in clear violation of the Geneva Convention's rules governing uniformed combatants. The intelligence value of these operations was immeasurable. Special Operations Executive Lysander missions successfully delivered 101 operatives into occupied territory, while bringing 128 agents safely back to England. These numbers represented far more than simple personnel movements. They embodied the transfer of critical intelligence, the coordination of resistance activities, and the maintenance of communication links that proved vital to the eventual liberation of occupied Europe. Among the agents transported by these flights were some of World War II's most legendary figures. Special Operations Executive operatives included men and women who would go on to organize sabotage campaigns, coordinate airborne operations, and provide intelligence that influenced major strategic decisions. The wireless operators, demolition experts, and resistance coordinators carried by Lysander flights formed the backbone of the underground networks that made D-Day possible. The technical challenges faced by Lysander crews evolved throughout the war as German defenses became more sophisticated. Early missions benefited from relatively light German night fighter coverage, but by 1943, the Luftwaffe had developed effective night interceptor capabilities. German radar coverage improved steadily, and mobile radar units made low-altitude penetration increasingly dangerous. Lysander pilots adapted their tactics accordingly, developing new approaches that maximized their aircraft's unique capabilities while minimizing exposure to German defenses. They learned to exploit weather conditions that grounded German fighters while still allowing visual navigation. They developed techniques for using terrain features to mask their approach and departure routes. Most importantly, they perfected the art of precision navigation that allowed them to find tiny landing zones in vast expanses of hostile territory. The aircraft themselves evolved as operational experience revealed areas for improvement. Later special duties variants incorporated lessons learned from early missions, with improved fuel systems, enhanced communication equipment, and refined passenger accommodations. The external fuel tanks were redesigned for better aerodynamic efficiency, while the passenger compartments were configured for maximum comfort during extended flights. As 1944 brought the prospect of liberation to occupied Europe, the role of Special Operations Executive Lysander flights became even more critical. The aircraft began carrying agents specifically trained to coordinate with advancing Allied forces, ensuring that resistance networks would be ready to support conventional military operations. These final missions were perhaps the most dangerous, as German forces became increasingly desperate and security measures intensified. The liberation of France in late 1944 marked the end of the Lysander's most famous chapter, but the aircraft's service continued in other theaters. Lysanders operated in the Mediterranean, supporting resistance movements in Yugoslavia and Greece. They served in the Middle East and Far East, where their unique capabilities proved valuable in terrain that challenged conventional aircraft operations. The global legacy of the Westland Lysander extended far beyond British service. The aircraft was operated by air forces in Canada, India, Egypt, and numerous other nations. In Canada, 225 aircraft were manufactured locally, with plans for additional production that were curtailed only by the war's end. The aircraft served in training roles, target towing missions, and even civilian applications, including aerial crop dusting. The Turkish Air Force, Irish Air Corps, Portuguese Air Force, and South African Air Force all operated Lysanders in various capacities. Even the United States Army Air Force acquired 25 aircraft for use as aerial gunnery targets, recognizing the value of the aircraft's stable flying characteristics for training purposes. The aircraft's service extended well beyond the end of World War II, with some variants remaining in active military service until the 1948 Palestine War. The technical specifications that had once seemed so inadequate for combat operations proved ideal for the aircraft's post-war civilian applications. The Lysander's ability to operate from short, unprepared airstrips made it valuable for agricultural work, survey missions, and transportation in remote areas where conventional aircraft couldn't operate. The aircraft's docile handling characteristics and excellent visibility made it popular with civilian pilots, while its robust construction ensured reliable service in demanding operating conditions. Today, surviving Lysanders are treasured artifacts of aviation history, displayed in museums around the world as reminders of one of World War II's most remarkable transformation stories. The Royal Air Force Museum in London displays the only surviving special duties variant, recently restored to its original No. 161 squadron color scheme. The Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum houses a Lysander painted in the colors of No. 138 Squadron, honoring the aircraft's clandestine service. At air shows and aviation events worldwide, the distinctive silhouette of the Westland Lysander continues to draw crowds of enthusiasts. who appreciate the aircraft's unique place in aviation history. The surviving airworthy examples demonstrate the same remarkable short-field performance that made the aircraft so valuable for special operations, landing, and taking off from grass strips that would challenge many modern aircraft. The story of the Westland Lysander represents one of military aviation's most compelling examples of adaptation and innovation under pressure. An aircraft that began as a conventional Army cooperation platform suffered devastating losses in its intended role and was nearly written off as a complete failure, ultimately found its true calling in one of World War II's most dangerous and important missions profiles. The transformation from combat failure to secret weapon illustrates the critical importance of matching aircraft capabilities to mission requirements. The same characteristics that made the Lysander vulnerable in daylight combat operations, its modest speed and distinctive appearance, became advantages during nighttime clandestine missions. The aircraft's exceptional short-field performance, initially seen as merely useful for forward area operations, proved revolutionary for missions requiring operation from improvised landing zones. Perhaps most importantly, the Lysander story demonstrates the courage and ingenuity of the men and women who turned an apparent disaster into one of Britain's most effective secret weapons. The pilots who flew these missions, the ground crews who maintained the aircraft under impossible conditions, and the agents who trusted their lives to this ungainly machine all contributed to one of World War II's most successful covert operations programs. The legacy of these brave individuals extends far beyond the statistical success of their missions. They proved that innovation, determination, and careful tactical thinking could overcome even the most challenging operational requirements. They demonstrated that aircraft dismissed as failures by conventional military thinking could find new life when matched with the right mission profile and flown by crews willing to push the boundaries of what was considered possible. In the end, the Westland Lysander's greatest victory was not in the skies over France during those desperate months of 1940, where it suffered such devastating losses. Instead, its triumph came in the moonlit fields of occupied Europe, where this awkward, ungainly aircraft became the lifeline that connected Britain's secret warriors with the resistance fighters who would help liberate a continent. From the ashes of apparent failure rose one of aviation's most unlikely heroes, proving that sometimes the most unconventional solutions become the most effective weapons in humanity's darkest hours.